Right now, if the room went completely silent, you would reach for your phone in under 6 seconds. Try it. Turn everything off. No music, no notifications, no hum of traffic outside your window. Just you and the quiet. Most people cannot survive that for more than a few minutes without feeling their skin crawl. But 3,000 years ago, a man sat alone on a mountain waiting for God to speak, and what he heard was not thunder, it was not fire, it was something far stranger, and it explains exactly why your brain panics the moment the noise stops. His name was Elijah. He had just won the greatest victory of his life. He had called down fire from the sky in front of an entire nation, humiliated 400 prophets of a false god, and proven publicly, undeniably, that his God was real. You would think a man like that would feel invincible. Instead, within 24 hours, he was running for his life into the wilderness, begging God to let him die under a broom tree. Why? What breaks a man right after his biggest win? Modern psychologists have a name for what happened to Elijah. It is called post-victory collapse, and it shows up constantly in elite athletes, soldiers, and executives after major triumphs. The nervous system spends everything it has to win the fight, and once the threat is gone, there is nothing left holding the walls up. Elijah did not fall apart because he failed. He fell apart because he finally stopped. God found him in that state and did something unexpected. He did not scold him. He fed him, let him sleep, fed him again, and then sent him on a 40-day walk to a mountain called Horeb. And there, in a cave, God asked him a question that still lands like a punch today. "What are you doing here?" Elijah answered with a spiral of grief and fear, convinced he was the last faithful person left on earth. So God told him to stand on the mountain because God was about to pass by. Then came the wind, not a breeze, a wind so violent it tore the mountains apart and shattered rocks. Elijah waited for God's voice inside it. Nothing. Then an earthquake, the ground itself splitting beneath him. Still nothing. Then fire, the kind of fire that had just rained down from the sky at his command a few weeks earlier. Still no voice. And then, after all of that spectacle, came the part almost every translation struggles to capture. The original Hebrew phrase is kol damama daka. It does not simply mean silence. It means something closer to a thin sound of stillness, or, as one respected translation puts it, a sound of sheer silence, not the absence of sound, a presence shaped like absence. And that is where Elijah finally heard God speak. Why does that detail matter so much? Because your brain right now in the 21st century is built to do exactly what Elijah did in the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. It scans for chaos and calls that meaning. Silence terrifies you because your nervous system has been trained generation after generation to associate quiet with danger. In the wild, silence often meant a predator was near. Noise meant life was still happening. So evolution wired your amygdala to treat stillness as a threat worth investigating, not a gift worth receiving. Here is where the science gets almost eerie in how closely it mirrors this ancient story. In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia ran an experiment that became famous almost overnight. He put people alone in a room with absolutely nothing to do except sit with their own thoughts for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, nothing. The results were startling. A significant number of participants, especially men, chose to give themselves mild electric shocks rather than sit quietly with their own minds. They had, in Wilson's own words, no idea how to just think anymore. Sound familiar? Elijah stood in front of hurricane winds and earthquakes because his mind, wrecked by exhaustion and grief, could not yet tolerate stillness either. The noise was not the danger. The quiet was. But something else happens in silence that most people never expect, and this is where the story bends toward hope instead of fear. In 2013, a researcher named Imke Kirsty at Duke University discovered that periods of silence, not music, not white noise, actual silence, triggered the growth of new cells in the hippocampus of mice, the part of the brain most linked to memory and emotional regulation. Silence was not neutral, It was regenerative. The brain was not idling in the quiet, it was rebuilding itself. Around the same period, an Italian cardiologist named Luciano Bernardi ran a separate study on the physiological effects of pauses between sounds. He found that 2-minute gaps of silence inserted between pieces of music produced deeper relaxation in the body, measured through blood pressure and blood flow, than the music itself did. The silence was doing more work than the sound. Bernardi's team noted that it was specifically the unexpectedness of the pause, the surrender into it, that produced the deepest physiological calm. Elijah did not find God in the display. He found God in the surrender that came after it. Think about what this means for you today. In a life filled with notification sounds, looping playlists, and background noise you barely notice anymore. Your ancestors were shaped by a world where quiet had to be earned, where the absence of danger sounded like nothing at all. Your modern brain inherited that wiring, but it lives in an environment engineered to never let you experience it. Every app on your phone is built, quite literally, to make sure the wind, the earthquake, and the fire never stop. So when silence does arrive, in a waiting room, in a car with the radio off, in the moments right before sleep, your mind treats it the way Elijah treated the mountain. It braces for something dramatic. It waits for the crash. And when nothing comes, many people do not feel peace. They feel a strange, low-grade dread, and they reach immediately for noise to make it stop. But here is the reframe the story is actually offering you. Elijah was not being tested to see if he could survive the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He had already survived worse than that on Mount Carmel. He was being led deliberately past every loud thing he expected God to be, toward a kind of presence he had never learned to recognize. The lesson was not that God is quiet. The lesson was that Elijah had to learn to listen differently than he ever had before. That is the same shift researchers are now finding proof for in laboratories. Silence is not empty space waiting to be filled. It is where memory consolidates, where the nervous system downregulates from threat mode, where the parts of your brain responsible for self-reflection, the default mode network, finally get room to activate instead of staying pinned under constant external stimulation. When you avoid silence, you are not avoiding nothing. You are avoiding the specific mental process your brain needs in order to process what has already happened to you. Elijah, remember, had just been through trauma, public triumph, followed by a death threat from a queen who wanted him executed by morning. His body was still flooded with the chemistry of a fight he had barely escaped. The wind and the earthquake and the fire were not God's voice. They were an echo of Elijah's own nervous system, still screaming from what it had just survived. God let him watch all of that pass by first. Only after the noise emptied itself out could Elijah hear anything at all. Is that not exactly what you need too, after the version of Mount Carmel in your own life? The deadline you barely survived, the argument that left you shaking, the years you spent proving yourself, only to feel hollow the moment you finally succeeded. You do not need another loud sign to know you are on the right path. You need the discipline to sit still long enough to hear the quiet one. The next time silence feels unbearable and your hand drifts toward your phone without you even deciding to move it, pause there for 1 second longer than feels comfortable. Not because silence is peaceful, it often is not at first. But because on the other side of that discomfort is where an ancient prophet, and quite possibly your own overworked mind, finally get to hear what has been waiting underneath all the noise the whole time. Because it was never really about the wind, it was never about the fire. Somewhere underneath everything you have been running from, there has always been a thin, quiet sound, patiently waiting for the noise in you to finally stop.